So today I want to talk about influence or affluence. The reason I wear face mask in this recording is because it allows me to play back the hand the clock backward till about, let's say, the 80s or 70s, um, to how life was before we get to today, um, the social media era. I was born in the 80s, so I don't really have much knowledge about what happened in the 60s, but I've been able to read and started to allow me to understand how people gain influence during those periods. And I remember, I think it was in a documentary that I saw, somebody was interviewed. I forgot the name of the guy. And he was asked, how did you get influence during those era that there wasn't social media and there was no YouTube, there was no Twitter, there was no Facebook. And he made a comment. He said, back then you need to be extremely, extremely good for people to really believe in the talent that you're putting out, for them to follow you and listen to whatever you do. Now, that is a raw work and a raw determination to be able to create that kind of drive for music label to actually sign you up during those times. You really have to be seriously extremely, extremely good for them to sign you up, because there wasn't no way you could market yourself in the traditional way that you have to market your talent. You have to market you as a person. So, and even with those kind of time, people still manage to build influence that even exceeded a decade into 2 or 3 decades up till today. For example, people like Michael Jordan's, we still talk about them today because of the influence. When they started, there wasn't much of social media to really put them out there. Till today, we still remember people like Michael Jackson. Till today, we still remember people in the business community that create massive amounts of influence, like Steve Jobs, and we still look back and we still remember the Wright brothers, and we still look the Carnegie. We still remember people that create massive influence industrializing our society, business, entertainment, etc. So these are people that created influence without nothing. All they had was just themselves and the dream that they carried. So that brings me to a word that I wrote down, that says, now it is important that we do not confuse affluence to influence. Um, Influence is the lava that flows out of a rock. The lava that flows out of a rock. The ability to have a measurable impact for a favorable outcome. Now, a lava that flows out of a rock. I remember when the classification of a rock in terms of, if we put it into context, is what refers to. You could use a rock to describe somebody. Oh, this person is as hard as a rock. It is a lava that flows out of a hard ground, out of a hard place. That is somebody who was determined, who was hard on the inside, and say, this life I have to make a difference, and I'm here to create a change. And that change is what I believe in. And I believe that I could translate the same thing that I carry to somebody else. And if I could do this, I can help somebody else, or somebody else can copy the work that I did and become whatever they want to become. Now they create a boss influence. Now, the flow isn't the reason to give up. When I mean the flow isn't the reason to give up, influencers mostly follow the flow. The flow could be the flow of pain that lead them to a certain point. They allow them to influence the outcome of whatever happened to them, and it translates to influencing somebody else. How we handle the unexpected determine the level of influence that we have. Now, you could have influence in social media, okay? You could be doing what you're doing, and you have people that love what you do, they follow it, and they create a like to it and comments to it. It's creating influence as well. But a long term influence, like people that are being remembered for decade, and their name, anytime you mention their name, it rings a bell. Now, there are two ways that you influence people. Now, you could influence non-influencers, that is just normal people, just regular people that wants to listen to you. That's one way of influence. Those are just normal people. Now you start getting to a level that you influence leaders. To be able to influence leaders, it's a different level. Now to get to a level that you influence influencers, it's a different level. To get to that level, you must have built a long line of track record. You must have overcome a certain amount of your own personal battles and get to a certain level that influencing influencers to influence influencers that they listen to you. That means you are at a certain level of your life and your career. Now that brings me to uh, um, this guy. I remember this guy, the legendary record producer Chris Blackwell, who managed and produced Bob Marley for years under the backdrop. And Yahweh Knows was asking Blackwell one time and said, "What is it that made you never appeared in the picture with Bob Marley, even with all of the record that you made with him, and every time it goes out, it's always by himself. You never appeared in a picture with him." And Blackwell responded by said, he did not need that, referring to himself and Bob Marley, that Bob Marley never needed that. He had all of that in himself. He knew what he knew what he wanted to do, and he knew how to get there. Now, an influencer influencing an influencer. Because when you are influencing for people to follow you to a certain level, you must have been able to overcome a certain level of personal battles. You have been able to overcome a certain amount of belief. Now, remember, influencers are people that people listen to and follow their life, and sometimes even copy what they do. That is what influencers are. Like we have musicians that are influencers that people follow them, copy their lifestyle, their dress code, whatever they do, whatever they say, people listen. For you to be at a level that you influence those kind of people is because your life has you've got to a certain point that you know who you are. You've been able to fight your battle and overcome your own personal battles. And you've done that consistently over years, over years. And for you to get to that level is because of an influencer that influences you so that you too, as an influencer, influences somebody else. Now, what makes a great leader is understanding who they are and what side of life that they belong to. What makes a great leader is understanding who they are and what side of life that they belong to. I remember Bob Marley's documentary that was featured Marley, and he was asked because he was raised by uh, a black mom and a white dad, and he was asked Since he was more of trying to, in his music and his writing and everything he does, was to try to create an equilibrium between the black and the white, and try to create a unison between that and live in society that was heavily divided and segregated. And he was asked in an interview, and he said something. He said, "I do not belong to the white side. I do not belong to the black side. What I belong to is the God side, because it is He that created me from the black and the white and gave me the talent that I have today. Our activity isn't what we face or whatever we face from life. It's understanding what side of life that we belong." And there are three things that we have to understand as influencers or wanting to be influencers. Is that to be an influencer is that we have to first choose what side of life that we want to belong. And there are different side of life. Remember that. There's a side of fear, there's a side of worry, and there's a side of faith. And to be an influencer, we will have to choose that. And I remember what Bob Marley said. He said, irrespective of what society think that I am, I know who I am. To be an influencer is that those people have mastered the act of themselves. It said, know thyself. And I remember is that the Bible says that in all thine doing, get wisdom, and in all thine getting, no, it says in all thine getting, get wisdom. And when you mean wisdom, not only the sensual wisdom, but also the wisdom of knowing who you are, what you carry, what you're here for, and what you're putting out into the world. So to influence first is for us to choose what side of life that we belong. It's either we choose worry, we choose fear, or we choose faith. But I would say that the latter is the better. You have to choose your side, but I will say choose faith. That is the currency that help you stand the journey ahead. Because to influence people is not just 1 minute. Now, remember, not every influencers actually produces a message that we all accept and believe to follow. There are people that has a certain message or things they're putting into the world, but people are called to that. There are people drawn to a certain message that people influencers put out there, and they're drawn to it. It doesn't mean that everything they say we agree to it, but the truth is the influence. The reason why the influence is because of the exercise of power over a long period of time. Because the scale of life is that you can rise to a certain level and you fall. But for those people that have been able to define that slope of life that brings them down, but rather they trigger it up to grow, influence is greater. But if you last in the game of life for 1 decade, and you last in the game of life for 2 decades, and you last in the game of life, be it in business, be it in life, be it in finance, and you last in that game for 1 decade, people start thinking different about you. They start thinking that he must have something that he really, really believes on, and he's doing that has allowed him to stay in the game for this long. And people start listening and wanting to be part of that. And when you go past 1 decade and you go past 2 decades and still doing it and still defining the hard and breaking limitations and still climbing higher, it puts people in a spot that they now keep watching and said, if that person can do it, if he can overcome certain amount of obstacle and keep rising against the wind and against the storm and keep creating a strong voice and keep doing what and believing what he believes, I follow him. I listen to him. I want to learn I want to know what he knows and why he does what he does. I remember, it puzzled my mind when I read the documentary about El Chapo, the Mexican did, the drug dealer, and how he influenced, even though the society, the community, everybody knew that what he was doing was wrong. But yet, people followed him, and I try to say, what is wrong with the mind of human beings? Why would they follow somebody that they know had a tag on his back? Now it's influence. It's because of what they put in out into the world, and what they've constantly communicated to people that listen to them over and over again, to let them know that what we represent is not just who we are, but we represent you. And I remember somebody like Donald Trump, the former president of the United States, and somebody, we had a discussion, and people was like, why is it so hard for the Republican Party to break free from him? And why is it so hard for people to understand the level of his dysfunctionality? Why do people still follow the brand? Now, remember, the brand has lasted for more than 3 decades. Consistency. People follow consistency. People follow leaders that are consistent. They follow them, and they see and they hear, they see their struggle, their fight, what they overcome, and how they rise above their difficulties. They follow leaders that are consistent, that are constantly pulling the envelope and turning things around. So that was why I said, what makes a great leader is understanding who they are and what side of life they belong. When you understand who you are and understand what side of life that you belong, it gives you a sense of ownership over your destiny. It gives you a sense of owning who you are and knowing what is in you, to knowing what is in you and what you represent, the word that you speak to people, and what you want people to know about you. That you're not just here for a night, but you're here to stay. You're here to create a long lasting impact that they will always remember. You're here to make a mark, not only for you, but for the people that you follow. And I remember in one of the campaign rally that Trump had, and I believe he was having a problem with the FBI, and he said something. He said, "They're not just coming for me; they're coming for us." Now, trying to connect his destiny and his faith with that of the people that follows him, influencers. To be an influencer, you need to understand who you are. You need to know where you're going. You need to know how to get there. You need to know, and above all, know who you really are.